100 Years Quest's anime is just around the corner. We've got, what, 4 months or so until we get to actually getting to the anime. We're supposed to have a trailer, hopefully soon, but we'll see. Heading into that, I think it'd be really, really fun just to talk about the magic itself, center point in the series. Now, when you look at practically every single series, and shonen specifically, well, and somewhat other series, but I'm primarily shonen, is you have the main character's power, and as well, who else has power similar to that, and essentially this categorization of what exactly the main character does. And when it comes to Fairy Tail, you have dragon slayers. And dragon slaying magic is something that varies because, though you think of it somewhat as straightforward, something like Natsu's, which Natsu has the most set one you would think of, fire dragon slaying magic. Dragon slaying magic is something that is very, very, very categorized in a large spread because it is Slayer magic in general, which, as we currently have, we have God slaying, devil slaying, and dragon slaying. But dragon slaying is a very broad type because we have way more so attributes and classifications than we do of any of the other ones. With God slaying, I would imagine it's mostly just the straightforward elements. There's nothing kind of as crazy. Devil slaying would probably have a little bit more spread, I would imagine, depending on what you have. Like if you had something like a Bane particle Devil Slayer, that would make sense to me. Or like a Soul Devil Slayer, something that is more set to less of a natural source and more of something that devils and demons would do as their species. And with dragon slayings, we do have a lot of set attributes, but we also have weird variations and different kinds that separate them from the other types. And at the start, we only really had the elements. Obviously, we started with fire, we got iron and thunder. Lightning, it depends on where you kind of go with it. Sky, and then obviously kept branching out, really just having the elements for the most part until we got to 100 Years Quest. And 100 Years Quest has done a lot to open up the branch of magic entirely. Because when you look at like something like Fairy Tail, you have to keep in mind every single magic has its own spread of different things. And if you look at something like Celestial Spirit magic, you have, you have the 12 golden keys, but you also have side things like all the different silver keys and singular spells that exist within the medium, but are not in the whole learning path. Because you could, say, get all of the golden keys or pretty much every key and never learn something like Eranometria or learn Godfried. It just depends on how exactly you access the magic or how you go about it. Because Lucy learned Eranometria, or Ornametoria, depending on pronunciation, before she even got anything like Stardress, before she even got anything like summoning 2 gold keys at once. But that was more so because she was able to memorize what happened and relearn the temporary usage that she got back in the Nirvana arc. With Dragon Slaying, though, the variations depend on what type of Dragon Slayer you are, like your attribute. You could have something as simple as fire, and that can escalate wildly, but also with something that you have a sub-attribute and some form of varied. Like there is Hellfire, there is something like you have both air, you also have sky, gale, because sky is a little different than air or wind by itself. It's like an upgraded version. It's kind of like how Sting isn't a light Dragon Slayer, he's a white Dragon Slayer. What does that mean? It means that not only does he have light, but he has a holy attribute as well. So it is 2 different types of magic essentially combined into one. And on top of that, as a Dragon Slayer, it isn't bound to just magic. It is something that is fueled by magic, but it results in a completely secondary type of power. Because dragons don't rely on magic. Magic is something in addition they get. So when you are accessing Dragon Slayer magic, you are hitting people with magical attacks, but also dragon-powered attacks. And we've seen instances of this, like when Natsu used Dragon Force against Zeref near the end of Alvarez. He refers to it specifically as dragon power. When Face goes off, the only dragon that dropped out of the sky was Acnologia, because Acnologia at his core is a wizard. He is dependent on magic. and the other dragons were still fine. They were able to use their normal racial abilities, stuff like the roars and breath attacks. And that is something that, though, even if you nullify all magic and take away their ability to use magic, that's just like taking away somebody's secondary magic in the verse, where it's like, oh yeah, if somebody is like, oh, if magic is something just in addition, somebody like Bacchus, for example. Bacchus uses magic that is not a big deal, but it enhances how he does things entirely. If you took away his ability to use his magic, he still is a very proficient martial artist and still has his physical attributes, because he is one of the characters that, though is still a wizard, he has trained his base body and physical capabilities to be capable even without the implementation of magic. Magic is just something in addition, similar to people like Jura and Gildarts. Meanwhile, dragon slaying, though, has differences that can always be applied and augmented even further. Whereas, like, again, someone like Bacchus, where it's like you just put magic in your palms and you strike people, dragon slaying is something that is dramatically increasing of that. And part of the reason of that is it's not just a general, oh yeah, I'm putting my element on my body. They are actually altering their body composition to match that of a dragon. There's a very brief description in chapter 1 where it's like Natsu is like being explained of like he actually is turning his lungs into dragon lungs, and that's how he's able to produce his elemental breath attack. They're able to essentially turn their hands and body parts dragon-like, and that's how they're able to produce their element and attribute upon their body so that they can use these abilities. So a dragon slayer is always going to be stronger using their attribute than without their attribute. And it's something that will always increase by your base. It's something, no matter what you do, you will always be more capable once using it, because your body is going to be set at a specific value, and using your element and your attribute will always increase to it way more dramatically so than any other singular magic in the verse. Because when it gets down to it, if you go over some information from once we kind of got explained of how Acto Loki became a dragon slayers will always further progress as they go in frequency of using their dragon slaying magic and how powerful they are. I would imagine there's a degree of just having it, that would probably tie into just using it on a regular basis, because generally in a lot of fiction, dragons will get stronger by default. An older the dragon gets, they will get so much stronger just by existing. And more so of that we see with dragon slaying magic. There's an inevitability that eventually they will get to a point where they'll get the dragon slaying weakness of motion sickness, to where their sensory organs and whatnot can all be overwhelmed by unnatural movement, and it causes them to be both crippled physically and magically. You look at the fact that eventually they get the dragon eyes, the slit eyes. Natsu seems to only get it in certain cases when he's using his powers, but we know that people like Gajil, Sting, and Rogue, they have the slit eyes all the time, and it's just kind of set in. The fangs, you'll get elongated canine fangs that are just set in your mouth. And part of that is because, unlike other magics, and you could look at slayers, like we know there's a degree of it with devil slaying, but there is a permanent effect that despite even when you're using your magic or not, your body is permanently altered to where you can't really do anything about it. So as you use it in general, you are going to just slowly morph your body to be more dragon-like, increasing as you go. The way I could describe it is like if you had a gauge where it's like starts at 0%, at 100% you become a full dragon. You every single time using it, maybe you go up by like, say like, oh, I'm a year or so ago I was at 10%, now I'm at 12%, and so every single time I'm pushed through my limits, you gain just a little fractional percent that permanently sets it, which helps me go into describing how Dragon Force works. Now, different dragon slaying elements, generations have different perks and traits to them. First generation really comes down to learning it. It's something that you learn through like an old-fashioned way of magic. Like, it'd be like essentially like any type of magic or branch of magic that you're trying to figure out. You are doing it through learning the understandable aspects of it, of how exactly this magic is going to be transformed in your body from raw magic all the way into a specific variation that you are essentially training your body to memorize and be able to hone and harness. Second generation is through a lacrima implant. I would imagine. I mean, I always say it's like the pay to win kind of version. You are at the root of it, probably buying it from some merchant, putting it in your body, and then applying the dragon attribute to magic that you already have, which is kind of weird because like it seems that way, but I mean with the Alexion stuff it seems very specific. Like he was bound to have lightning, but Laxus was very clear on lightning themed even before he had dragon slaying. So it kind of depends on where you view it with that. Either or, it doesn't seem to be as important, but either you get the dragon slaying attribute of that lacrima, or you're getting the dragon attribute applying to what you're already doing. It seems a little hard just because I feel like the likelihood of finding your specific dragon slaying lacrima that of an element you already have would be far more difficult than finding it in general, but I don't think that's important to kind of discuss. Third generation is just combining the two, and we have seen the dragon force of those. Obviously we see Natsu and Ko use it, like Natsu uses it early as the Tower of Heaven. We see Laxus and Cobra use it in their first respective arcs, which it is dragon force. I've seen a lot of discourse around that, but Laxus for sure uses Dragon Force. We know because of the fact that he gains dragon scales during that process, and Cobra gets the dragon hands. Now, why do I know that that's Dragon Force without it being stated? Is because the idea of Dragon Force in of itself is, it's like a temporary further step. Like I said, say you're 10% in the dragonification process, and you use Dragon Force, you are temporarily moving now, say, to 25%. So you are gaining a massive increase of the dragon-like properties in your body. And why that's important is because the percentage of where you're at as a dragon seems to go across the board over all your capabilities. So if you have a guy at 10% and a guy at 11%, the 11% is going to be able to just do more with his dragon attribute, his dragon elements and capabilities than the guy at 10%. A good example of this is during the Zero fight, Natsu was able to burn magic. And then later, so once Natsu fought Sting and Rogue, he was able to do that without Dragon Force. So he reached a point in his power and dragon status to where he's able to use this trait and ability of his respective branch that he wasn't able to before. But in the fight with Zero, he was pushed to a point after eating the Flame of Rebuke to where he could use this ability that he can't do normally. It's something that is within his eventual span of capabilities, but just at the time he wasn't strong enough, or his dragonification percentage wasn't at a state to where he could do it. It always comes down to where they're at with that. And with all of that percentage, it would make sense of why Laxus and Cobra, though they're gaining seemingly more of dragon-like properties, it seemed way more surface level and less internally. Because say you can have the scales, so when Natsu gets like just general scales on his face and forearms, but if your internal aspects are not as dragonized, then you're not going to see the same level of results. We don't really have anything in regards to fourth generation, because like I said, first generation, you're pretty much learning it, whether it be from a dragon or from a book. It seems you are just learning it the old-fashioned way. I'm suspicious of Elisaria, but for right now, let's just take his word for it, and he learned it the old-fashioned way. Second generation, like I said, an implant. Third is 1 and 2, so there's not anything kind of really varied. It just seems more like third generation is like you're already like in way to describe it. It's like first generation is like working out. Second one, you're kind of taking steroids, where it's like 3 is both. Like you're just further enhancing it and gaining an artificial boost on top of your natural boost in natural strength. Fourth gen is through an inanimate object. It's kind of hard to really get the full grasp of fourth gen, just because the only time we've seen it is in the Dragon Cry movie, but we know that movie is canon and they are brought up in the official manga, and we see them through artificial beings, essentially golems, constructs, robots, whatever you kind of want to refer to the Quantum Knights as, but they are inanimate objects that are able to be imbued with dragon slaying magic and being able to affect people with a dragon slaying power. The way that I look at it would be essentially Urza with her Belsarion sword, is technically a 4th gen, but it's more so the sword is a 4th gen. Urza herself is not a 4th gen. That's how I've always looked at it personally. But with 5th generation, you are intaking dragon flesh and consuming it and becoming dragon-like in that process. And you are essentially doing like a fast-paced way to become more dragon-like. And it'd be like if you ever seen, like, I know there's like a joke commercial where it's like this guy has a machine hooked up to some guy who's working out, and he's gaining all the muscle mass because he's like making it so his brain thinks that he's the one doing all that, so it just automatically gets stronger. Not the best way to describe it, but you're essentially just grabbing the straight thing and intaking it. I guess you can kind of look at it like Kirby or like Mega Man. You could somehow gain this ability, but you are instead taking that directly and eating it. It would be like, say you are a blank dragon slayer, you just have the eating capability, and then you consume any element you decide to, and bam, that's the first one you take in, that's your element now. But with Georg, it seems like the more you eat, like if you eat multiple dragons, you will gain multiple powers. Very curious as the extent of that, because we know from the conceptual embodiment of Duke that the 5th generation dragon slayers are impure, which makes sense of why their dragon force is so chaotic and uncontrolled. Because like I said, when you look at 1st generation, it doesn't seem like 1st generation has any fast-paced ways of getting dragon force other than just eating and intaking and assimilating a powerful enough source of energy within your attribute or something that you manage to digest. 2nd and 3rd can do it off the lacrima, but using it off the lacrima is just not nearly as powerful as either naturally achieving dragon force or eating something that ends up resulting in dragon force. 5th gen is like more like a trump card, to where you at that point just pull it out and you fast speed accelerate into being dragon-like, and through that process you are able to achieve power faster, but at a much more dangerous, double-edged like risk and state. Because when we saw Nibaru, he became a dragon seemingly in like a minute or two, but in the process he was losing his mind. He was becoming feral and crazed, and because of that, it's not something that 5th generation dragon slayers are able to really use at will, which is really interesting. Because 5th generation, I assume that just by how they are created, because when you compare them to 1st gen, like essentially any of the other generations, they don't get motion sickness. I would imagine that, like, say if you took the Quantum Knights, they might get motion sickness, maybe just because it would be something maybe that their bodies, like as creatures, wouldn't be able to really handle. It'd be kind of weird. Or like Urza's sword would stop working. I don't think so. I feel like with 4th gen, at least from theory, would not have a motion sickness quality. Whereas, like, say if when Wendy's putting the dragon attribute on them, maybe them getting motion sickness, I could see that happening. But 5th gen does not seem to get any form of motion sickness and doesn't suffer from that weakness. And I think that the reason that for that is because their bodies becoming more dragon-like, but in a much more almost Frankenstein manner. And because of that, they aren't suffering the same thing as like a natural dragon slayer. Their bodies are just getting more morphed and just jacked to where they are neither human nor dragon, almost kind of like some weird chimera mesh between the two. And that's why when they use dragon force, they become feral. Because my thought was maybe like, oh well, they don't have motion sickness weakness. I always wondered, like, maybe they can't eat their element and that's the kind of drawback, but they can't eat just general dragon meat in general. But no, they can eat their attribute, and because of that, instead their danger is not being able to use dragon force freely. Whereas like Natsu or somebody can use dragon force and it will burn their magic. It's a high cost, like all-in kind of technique, but it's something that having always in your back pocket and knowing that if you win, bam, you're good. Whereas if 5th gen, if you use it, it seems to be an all-in move, and after that point you're going to lose your humanity, so it's not something that you really have as a trump card the same degree as any of the other generations. So when looking at all that though, there's a question that I want to put in here that I think is going to make a lot of sense for following kind of all this content on the dragon slayers in general and just slayers in general. And you know, if you want to use this for anything, just kind of like remember this time. It's like 20 minutes in, and it's why exactly a Dragon Slayer and Slayer in general is so almost like almost unfair, really, to put against somebody of the same attribute as them. And I've seen stuff like, you'll see like, oh, Natsu versus Ace or Yamamoto, or I'm trying to think of another popular fire person, Marileona. And it's like, well, you know, you just say that they, you know, they can adapt and eat their attribute and blah, blah, blah. You know, they seem like they can do that. And it just sounds like you just think that they counter everybody. The entire point of Slayers at their core is they are designed to counter that specific type that they are fighting. A Fire Dragon Slayer, though they can combat and fight other people like normal, because the way that it's implemented is you are essentially becoming a Fire Dragon, but at the core of it, you are designed to counter Fire Dragons. And then by just kind of variational kind of adjacency of it, other fire users. Because at the, like I said, at the core of it, the idea is like, I'm going to be a Fire Dragon Slayer. You are setting yourself up to where if you ever have to fight a fire dragon, you are in the best possible position that anybody can be in, unless you're maybe like a straight elemental counter to it. But I would imagine really just being that set element is better than being the counter. And the reason of that is the thing about a Dragon Slayer, and again, Slayers in general, but more so Dragon Slayers, the double-edged sword is their weakness. One, like the lower, lower numbers, I guess, really, the earlier ones of Dragon Slayers have the weakness to motion sickness. 5th gen having the fact that they can't use Dragon Force freely. It's a dangerous double-edged sword. But the big thing about their magic kind of just branch in general is the fact that they can eat their element to regain magic and stamina. And it's not just to regain magic and stamina, it's to where they can eventually break past their limitations and where they're at and achieve higher levels that they can't do normally. Again, look at someone like when Natsu fought Jalal, when Natsu fought Zero. These were boosts that he got that he could, like, oh yeah, you know, somebody enchanted their magic, or they all just like all sat around and conjured and put all their magic in somebody's body. That's different. But it is because of the fact that he has this ability to intake fire. And, you know, I was talking about Ethereon. Ethereon's a mesh of multiple elements. Dangerous that he even did it in the first place, but it was just something he barely managed to do. It lets you push past those limitations. It's almost like having a specific Kaioken, to where if you are facing somebody of your set attribute, you are, in a way, you're going to be able to, you know, eat their attacks, just be able to just say nope to anything they send at you. But when you're doing that and, you know, you're a character throwing your element at a Slayer, eventually you're going to push them past a power level breakpoint, and they are going to go into Dragon Force, and all of their stats and capabilities are going to blow through the roof, and you are making them stronger in the process. I guess really, if you think about it, it'd be like fighting a snowman, and your idea is to throw snowballs at him. You're going to keep making them bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and then eventually they're going to go from like a regular sized snowman to a colossal building sized behemoth that's just going to crush you. So when you look at the entire categorization of how Dragon Slayers work, remember that they are fundamentally set to counter dragons of that attribute, but also that attribute in of itself. And part of that is we've seen that Dragon Slayers and, you know, Devil Slayer, I gotta stop just trying to be like, also them, just so you remember the other Slayers. There's other Slayers, even though we've only seen one type of Devil Slayer. But Slayers in general, I guess it's relevant because Gray is another example of it, is that they can adapt to variations of their attribute. It isn't just the straight, that attribute. Anytime they run into something that they normally couldn't eat, you know, Natsu versus Zenkro, Gray versus Invil or Hakune, Gajil versus Bloodman, if it's something within their realm of attribute, they have the ability to adapt their body to that and then gain the ability to eat that. Natsu wasn't able to eat Zenkro's Godfire, adapted his body to it was one that could do it. Gray was having issues with Invil's True Ice for a point, and Hakune's Ice adapted to it. Gajil was being poisoned by Bloodman's devil particles, adapted to it. And part of that is, if you are one of these slayers, you have to be capable of fighting anything within that branch. And you could use Natsu, but I'll use Gajil as an example, because Gajil's one that I think makes it a lot easier. Gajil is an Iron Dragon Slayer, but he is in the categorization really of metal, because we've seen him eat not just iron, we've seen him eat steel, we've seen him eat Wizard Canceller metal, and because of that, I wish we like had a way more like he's eating platinum, or like, yeah, has he eaten gold? I know people wanted that with Fiernes, but maybe it's like Mishima didn't want to be like, logically Gajil would have this if he came in, but it doesn't make sense just to bring him in to have a power up. Not important. But if you have, say, he's up against a dragon or a devil or any form of creature that is of a different metal. I'll use platinum, for example. I mentioned platinum. He should have the ability to adapt to it and counter and work through it, especially if it's a dragon. You know, if he's, and we saw that as well to a degree when he ended up having the carbon from the devil particles in his fight with Torafuza turn his iron into steel. A Dragon Slayer's ability to adapt their body and attribute is part of the whole fundamental setup of how their magic works, because you are essentially turning your body into that of another creature or another being and altering the composition to meet a certain goal. And that's one of the things, obviously, as well with like someone like Acnologia's body could adapt to any magic and continuously grow stronger and become immune to other things. Because once they are able to adapt to it, they're pretty much immune to that level and capabilities of that, you know, variation of their element they weren't before, like Zankro's God Flames. So it's just kind of something I also wanted to kind of round in when talking about all this, because I always see people like talking, oh, you think that these Slayers beat everybody? It's like, it's not that they beat everybody, but if you put anyone within their logical range and they have the same attribute, they have the ability to not only already have a resistance and counter to them, but they also can adapt and just straight, you know, like I said, you're throwing snowballs at a snowman. You're just adding to their mass and to their capabilities, and eventually they're going to just shatter past that limitation ceiling that they're currently at and become stronger than they are currently capable of, and you're fueling into that again. And you can look at it too like throwing gasoline to a fire. You are just making the fire bigger and stronger and hotter. And that's something I just wanted, like I said, to kind of add in here, because Slayers are going to be a big thing once we get in, like more so I guess rather once we get into the 100 Years quest. People who are anime onlys are going to be wondering exactly what the differences of them are, what the values and advantages of them are in reality, because we've seen them throughout the series, but they haven't been as main focused as they have been in 100 Years Quest. And because of that, I think it makes sense for us to kind of just have like a general discussion and talk about what exactly their values, what exactly like they present, and what they bring to the table that makes them so dangerous. Because I think people forget that. Like I said, when you get to the core of it, Dragon Slayer, I'm just on the Dragon Slayer specifically is the best example. They are designed to counter the type they are. It was made initially as a countering, like, what was the word that was used? Interception type magic. You are somebody who is specialized in fighting that specific dragon element and attribute. In theory, obviously, like gaps of power, like, you know, if you take Atlas Flame and put him against Chapter 1 Natsu is going to get demolished. But the idea of it is you are eventually, you know, though becoming this respective branch of Dragon Slayer, but you also are in a dedication to where if you ever have to fight another dragon or Dragon Slayer or whatever of this branch, you are the best counter to it. And something like Laxus versus Kirin is a good example as well, because they not only have the same element, it was just they are from the same exact dragon. And because of that, they're able to contend with each other, but you see the gap when it comes to just strength and capabilities, with Kirin dominating the fight most of the time, and Laxus having to have a elemental boost near the end, though he says that the Lacrima did hold him back a bit. So it's something that it's like, well, he just doesn't have his full capabilities at that fight, but next time, maybe we will see them actually on set equal grounds, and Kirin won't have the advantage like the whole time. I really like the idea of it being that Kieran will always be more capable in his just straight branch, just because he's a Dragon Eater and he seems to only use that element. And Laxus has his red lightning, and then on top of that, I'd love to see Laxus integrate Fairy Law into something. That's a completely different scenario and discussion. But anyway, other than that, tell me what your thoughts are about all this and what you think that the whole value of a Dragon Slayer is. Do you think that 100 Years Quest has expanded upon the branch of Magic enough? Do you think it needs more? And what else do you think would be cool to see? Like, also tell me what kind of Dragon Slayer you would love to see. Because like I said, it's not as important to this, but we've seen other types: Sword State Dragon, Slaying Magic, Blade Dragon, Armor Dragon, whatever Haku is. But as of right now, it's just something we're going to be hopefully finding out more of. But I still think we've got a good enough amount of information to really gauge what we're looking at and to gauge how they all work, the values and disadvantages of the branch and how it goes. But anyway, dog's barking. He wants me to finish this video. Anyway, yeah, comment below. Tell me your thoughts are about this, and I got to take care of this dog, and where exactly you think the next bit of information could be. Maybe we'll find out more about 4th gen. But other than that, thanks everyone for discussing, except my dog apparently, and see ya.